Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, some of our regular viewers, that would be Joe and Dave from Southend, have complained that they're suffering from election fatigue. Well, not everybody is, you know. Over 2 million people have registered to vote since Theresa May called this election, with registrations coming at a faster rate than before the Brexit referendum. This election will, after all, determine the future of our country, of our security, our economy, our public services, and looming above it all, what Britain might look like post-Brexit. But what role the media in all this? Have the broadcasters, the newspapers covered the issues properly while giving all those who aspire to be Prime Minister an even and fair shake? Here's the artist, writer and social entrepreneur Akala with his take of the week.
Until last week, virtually the entire mainstream media predicted a landslide victory for the Conservatives and had written off Jeremy Corbyn as totally unelectable.
But the Labour leader is outside the elitist bubble. He speaks to many in my generation that came of age during the Iraq War, a period of lies by media and government. We've often been written off as apolitical and ignored, but because of the policies and campaigns surrounding Jeremy Corbyn, many people like me will be voting for the first time.
The war's bullshit, it's all bullshit.
Corbyn has been subjected to many personal attacks in the media, particularly in the wake of the Manchester bombing, blasted as a shameless apologist for the world's men of evil. But his recognition that the Iraq War has helped to spread terrorism merely echoes the analysis of the intelligence services and even some Tories. But the media lies have not fooled my peers. In fact, they have probably boosted his credibility.
All of what they feed us in the news, it is bullshit. Plus what they teach us in the schools, it is bullshit. The war's bullshit, it's all bullshit.
Similarly, the failure of journalists to properly probe the Prime Minister about Britain's relationship with Saudi Arabia, even as they kill civilians in Yemen with bombs sold to them by British companies, or about the proposed dismantling of the NHS, has only served to confirm in many people's minds that the media is indeed protecting the elite. But why is this surprising? A hugely disproportionate amount of senior figures within the British media literally went to the same private schools and universities as our senior politicians. Can they truly represent the radically divergent worldviews that exist within Britain? Much less the 5 billionaires that own an estimated 80% of the British media. Last year, a study ranked the British media as the most right-wing of the major countries in Europe. Is it really then any surprise that social policies that are considered entirely normal on much of the continent are portrayed as left-wing lunacy here?
No expense spared by the production team there, and as if by magic, Akala is here now. Welcome to the programme.
Thank you.
Now, if the media is so overwhelmingly biased against Mr Corbyn, why is he having such a good campaign?
Partly because Theresa May's proved completely inept. She's called a snap election. Her campaign's not been very effective. It's been all over the place. There's been a large social media presence with Corbyn's campaign. And of course, as the Labour Party has started to gain momentum, the media's had to take him a little bit more seriously. But if we just remember 3-4 weeks ago, that kind of tone of serious opposition wasn't there at all. And it was this repeated nebulous phrase of unelectable, whatever that means.
But many in the Labour Party thought that as well. If the media is full of Tory stooges, why would the polls narrow?
Because people have seen the campaign unfold, as I said, and they've seen, on the one hand, a campaign that's quite inept. They've seen a manifesto come out that's been written off as kind of Marxist nonsense, which, of course, anyone who's read Marx and Lenin would know this is not even close to being a Marxist manifesto. It contains many policies, as I alluded to in the film, that are absolutely normal in some of the wealthiest countries in the world. And then they've seen another manifesto come out that's completely uncosted. They've seen...
right, and it's the media that's told them it's uncosted.
100%.
So I don't quite understand why the media has been so biased. It's the media has reported a lot of how bad Mrs May's campaign has been. The media has reported that Mr Corbyn's having a much better campaign than most people expected. I suspect even Mr Corbyn himself. So if you add all that together, I would have thought the media, by and large, is doing its job.
Well, I don't know if I really accept that. I think, of course, the media has had to take the candidate more seriously as the obvious trends have changed. And I would argue that it's people who've organised and shown their support and record youth registration and voting that has come out, and that has forced a kind of change in tone and an attempt to treat this election some way seriously.
Has the media been overwhelmingly biased against Mr. Corbyn?
I think that he has faced some tough questions in the early period, and Theresa May's had some tougher questions in the later period. It's tough because if you think of David Cameron or George Osborne, when they were Prime Minister and Chancellor, or Theresa May, do they face the kind of questions Jeremy gets asked about what he was doing 20, 30, 35 years ago? The counter-argument is that goes to questions of political judgment and character in terms of the relationships he had and the people he dealt with. I guess my argument with Akala comes back to this. One of the great strengths of our society is that we have an independent BBC, which isn't owned by billionaires and actually is trusted because it's always been objective and tough. I think the BBC has been tough on both sides in this election campaign. Quite a lot of Jeremy Corbyn's supporters think the BBC is part of the elite establishment, but I'm not sure that's right.
I mean, do you draw a distinction between the broadcasters and the newspapers?
I think the tone of the newspapers has definitely been much worse. But again, you make a point about Corbyn facing tough questions about 34 years ago. I made a point in the film which still hasn't been addressed. Why the Prime Minister's not facing tough questions about our relationship with a country that today stands widely accused of being a funder of terrorism today. And we'll see how it pans out in the next week. But, you know, the article picked up in the Daily Mail by Peter Oborne broke that suggesting that the Manchester terrorist was not only allowed but facilitated in travel into Libya to presumably kill people and help overthrow Gaddafi and then let back in the country.
So that issue has been raised by the Daily Mail?
It's been raised by the Daily Mail.
About Mrs. May?
100%, and I take that point. Will the Prime Minister be grilled about that in the same manner in which Jeremy Corbyn has been grilled about the IRA question?
What's wrong with grilling the Labour leader about the IRA?
Absolutely nothing.
There isn't? Absolutely
nothing. I'm just asking, right now, in 2017, we have long-standing, multi-billion trade relationships with a country that stands widely accused of terrorism now, today, not 34 years ago. And I'm not seeing the same tone of questioning being taken about something that is happening today. So I'm not suggesting it's, you know, completely disparate. I'm suggesting there's subtle differences that in the end add up to massive differences. When a former politician gets the cover of the Evening Standard to say, Comrade Corbyn flies the red flag, that's adjectives. That's not critique of policy. It's clearly not a Marxist manifesto.
He's been quite tough on Theresa May as well, though.
100%.
I mean, I think the Evening Standard has not exactly been a cheerleader for the Prime Minister.
No, I take the point.
Maybe the newspapers just don't matter as much anymore.
I think they matter slightly less, it's true. I mean, I think one of the areas where I disagree, I mean, I think you've made some very good points, actually, but is that the media is not a monolith. And nobody is forced to buy or to consume either newspapers or any particular type of media. And it's also the case that there have been alternatives. And on the left, there are sites like The Canary and Squawk Box and so on, which, you know, whatever I might think of them, undeniably have a following. So I think there's a greater degree of pluralism there. And it's clearly the case that amongst some young voters, there's an enthusiasm for Corbyn that's reflected in new media and perhaps less so in the mainstream media. But I do think, and you've been, I think, generous enough to acknowledge this, that there are some tough questions that Jeremy has to face. And you know, if you attend a meeting and call for a minute's silence for the IRA and for terrorists who've been killed, that is a big question. Imagine if Theresa May had called for a minute's silence.
Well, you mean like David Cameron going to King Abdullah's funeral?
Well, there's a big difference between King Abdullah and the IRA. Imagine if a British political figure bidding to be Prime Minister had sought to honour the fascists of the BNP.
But you're flogging a dead horse, because I've admitted that it's legitimate for him to face
I'm talking about the dead people whom the IRA killed.
What? No, that's
and
not...
the point is, the IRA were an organisation run on the basis of killing innocents and putting British soldiers in the line of fire. And Jeremy Corbyn wants to run this country, wants to lead our armed forces, and he dishonoured them and their memory by calling for a minute's silence for terrorist killers.
As we speak right now, a story has broken which I want to see in the next week before Thursday, if the Prime Minister is going to be asked the tough questions about possible collaboration between the intelligence services and known terrorist sympathisers who've gone to foreign countries to kill people, who've been let back in Britain and blown up a pop concert and killed 22
Well,
people.
what's the evidence for that?
No, I'm just saying that's the story that's broke, so the Prime Minister should be asked the tough questions.
But it's
That's
quite
what I'm
hard
saying.
to ask tough questions if you have... I mean, I wouldn't ask a tough question if I didn't have the evidence to back it
Well,
up.
it's been published.
I can't just fly a question.
100%, but many media outlets have carried it.
Yeah, but without evidence.
Well, then they should be sued for libel, should they not? Publish in such a sensitive story.
I don't
without
think the
evidence.
security services are going to sue the Daily Mail for libel.
It's not only the Daily Mail, other platforms have carried it. I'm just saying these are tough questions that the Prime Minister also has to be asked. And that we have a relationship with Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia stands widely accused of supporting terrorism is not disputed.
Is there any evidence that young people are going to come riding to Mr. Corbyn in huge numbers?
Well, the YouGov organisation, the Times newspaper, have taken quite a big punt on the idea that they might with that poll, because clearly the difference between the YouGov poll and ICM and the other pollsters is the other pollsters are saying if you didn't vote in the last election or in the referendum last year, we're going to assume in the end you won't turn out, whereas YouGov's taking a punt on greater turnout. We know from the numbers that if young people under 30 came out in large numbers, that would be a big swing to Labour.
That would help Labour.
And that is
hugely.
the big, it's a big unknown for this general election.
I know you hope it happens, but what is the evidence that it will happen, do you think? Because I have to say, I've been here many times before.
100%. I'm not sure, and I'm still dubious, and I still am aware that we're quite a conservative country. I'm not myself even particularly a Labour supporter. My politics are probably closer to the Green Party. I've never voted before, as I said in the film.
Are you going to vote this time?
I am going to vote this time because I think that there is enough of a significant difference between this current leadership of the Labour Party and the Tories.
But in the last election, you'd have voted Green, not Labour.
Yeah, if I had voted, I would have voted Green.
I mean, the media coverage may or may not be biased in the past 4 or 5 weeks, but it's done one thing, this campaign, and it's the media that's largely shown it. It's rumbled Theresa May, hasn't it? It's shown her up to be a pretty
There's headlines on the front page of-
second division politician.
Well, considering that I stood in an election against Theresa May and she buried me by a landslide, I think I have to acknowledge that would make me
Third
probably
division.
a Vauxhall Conference level politician.
I don't
by your
think we have
comparison.
that anymore, but anyway.
Yeah.
Let's stick with third division.
There wasn't actually a vote, Michael. There wasn't actually a vote. It was
there wasn't a vote amongst the members.
I mean, has
No,
there
but
been,
she's a better organiser.
has there been a worse
You've got-
Tory campaign in living memory?
Yes, my one for the leadership.
No, election campaign.
No.
General
election campaign. Well,
has there been a worse election campaign for the Tories in living memory?
Is it
Well,
worse?
well, I think the critical thing, Andrew, is that you
87?
cannot judge a campaign until the end result. There were all sorts of people who criticised the Leave campaign, for example, and actually it ended up winning. Victory, in the end, will be the confirmation of how well or badly this campaign's been run. And Ed makes the point that the 1987 campaign of the Conservatives had its moments which were portrayed in the media as wobbles. It ended up in a Conservative landslide. Theresa May will increase her majority.
And will victory for Theresa May in this election prove to be as Pyrrhic as victory in the Leave campaign was for you?
I don't
That's
think
quite
it was Pyrrhic.
complicated. It's a good
think
question. It's
a very good
complicated.
question. But I don't think it was Pyrrhic in the sense that even though the outworkings led to me no longer being in government, I'm glad that Britain's leaving the European
You'll
Union.
be back in 10 days' time.
I know.
You'll
be back in 10 days' time.
See how they
Of
stick
course.
different parties, they stick together. Do you think not so badly of the media after tonight?
It's not even necessarily that I think terribly of the media in the sense that I don't believe complete objectivity is even philosophically possible.
That's why you want to diversity.
Right. If I ran a news channel, even if I didn't mean for it to, it would naturally reflect some of
because
my...
you choose the
some of my
agenda and
passion.
so on.
Precisely. So if you have, which was the point I tried to make in the film, similarly educated people from similar backgrounds running all of the main institutions, even if they don't intend it, the outcome can often be perceived to me
we
like be
haven't
biased.
got time.
I think that's one of your strongest points.
Would you exclude this week from your criticisms?
Well, I don't know. We'll see. I have to watch a few more episodes.
At least we got one. Mr. Corbyn's got one more voter, and we've got one more viewer.
Cool.
We like it. Thank you very much for
Thank
being
you.
with us.
Thank you.
I've been getting away with it